I'm just gonna say hello at the beginning, and then I'm gonna turn off my video so you can see my slides better. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to be sharing some ideas about best practices for content editor, for the experience for content editors, not just from Drupal, but also what we can learn from some other CMSs. My name is Suzanne Dergacheva. If I haven't met you already, I work at Evolving Web. I'm one of the co-founders, and I also lead the Promote Drupal initiative. So it's really nice to meet you all. I think a lot of the time when we're building a website with Drupal, we're thinking about building this. We're thinking about building the end user experience, the beautiful pages that we see in our designs. We want to bring them to life. And that's really what we're focused on delivering. But I sometimes wonder what would happen if we change that mindset and we focus more on building this, the interface that content editors and site administrators actually use to manage content. And so that's what I want to dive into today. Content editors, of course, they're important users, and I hear this more and more when scoping out a project. So I'm often the one doing the discovery workshops when we're talking about target audiences and personas. And people more and more are naming content editors as a persona, as a target audience that we actually want to design for, which is really exciting because when you think about it, this makes sense. The content editors are actually creating the end user experience as they build pages and integrate media and edit the messaging of a website. So the better interface that they have to do that, the better the website's going to be in the long term, not just the day we launch it. But the trick is, what do content editors actually need to get their job done? It's actually, I think, a harder task than building for the end user. And that's partly because websites vary so much from site to site and roles can be really diverse, which is why Drupal is such a great tool. It provides us a lot of flexibility in all of these areas. But if I had to summarize, I think that there's really 4 things that content editors need. And I would break it down like this. So they need a user-friendly interface that's actually accessible to them. That's kind of the requirement 0, the very first thing they need. They need a content workflow for publishing content, and that could just be as easy as having content that's published or unpublished. But it could obviously get quite more advanced if they have to get content approved and translated. Then they need to think about content compliance. So more and more these days, content editors are really the ones responsible for making sure that content is accessible and it follows guidelines and that it is bringing value in terms of SEO. And so that all falls under content compliance. And then the icing on the cake, but actually the thing that I think people use to assess whether something is a good content editor experience is how much flexibility it gives. And so this is where we start thinking about page building tools. And I know there have been presentations here at DrupalCon about layout builder versus paragraphs versus Gutenberg and what provides the best experience. And I think that all falls into this flexibility category. And how the website can actually be used as a marketing tool. So in using other CMSs, other than just Drupal, I think we get a lot of insight into how to do all of these things better. And I'm going to share my slides. You can read the results of a user study that I conducted a while back to actually collect some research on these things. So I'm just going to walk through these 4 categories and generate some ideas, and hopefully this gives you some food for thought. And feel free to throw questions or comments or other ideas into the Q&A tab, into the chat tab. So the first item is all about first impressions. So how do we build, a more user-friendly admin UI? And I think in this category, Drupal's Claro theme does a long way to providing this for our content editors. It's a more accessible, it's a more friendly interface than what we had previously in Drupal. And so just by enabling this, I think we are off to a good start in terms of the interface. But I do think one thing that we can really learn from the WordPress community, from the WordPress UI, is the language that we use in an admin interface. So WordPress's admin UI has always been oriented more around the content editor experience, just because of the history of WordPress's usership. And the dashboard and the navigation, if you look just at the words that are used, they really prioritize the content editor tasks. And they use words that speak more to content editors. So the next thing that we think about is our workflows, publishing workflows. Like how do editors actually find the content they need to edit? How do they publish it? How do they get it approved and out the door? How do they keep track of different versions? And how can we optimize all of this? And one interface that I really was excited to see is the Contentful interface. This is their version of the content overview page. And Contentful provides really a flexible search interface here. The content overview page, I mean, it lists all of the content, all of the pages that you can edit, but the filters that you have available at the top are super flexible. So it gives content editors the ability to drill down into the content in a really granular way. And since this is kind of the primary tool that content editors have, this is their main dashboard they're using to dig into the content, unless you're designing a custom one, I think it's really worth putting some energy into this page. In terms of previewing content, the WordPress interface comes with a built-in responsive preview tool, which allows you to see what content is going to look like on different types of devices. And I think this is something content editors really appreciate. At the same time, I think that we can get this really easily with Drupal. There's a responsive preview module, which I actually found by trying out the Thunder distribution and checking out some of the modules that it includes. And with this tool, we get pretty much the same thing. We can configure the different devices that you can preview on, which I really like. Craft CMS has actually a side-by-side editing and preview tool that content editors respond really well to. And this is one of the features that I liked most about Craft CMS when demoing it and trying it out with content editors. Another key feature when we're talking about workflows is predictability. And I think more and more these days, all of us as users are expecting tools to auto-save our work. And this comes from the fact that we're all using things like Google Docs, we're editing settings on our phone, and a lot of these interfaces don't have necessarily a save button. They're just auto-saving everything we're doing. And in Contentful, autosave is a built-in feature. And so it's giving you a status of, when was the content last saved, and kind of reassuring you that your work is saved. And auto-saving and publication status work the same way in Contentful for main content, like pages of content, but also for all the content components that go into a page. And in Contentful, these are called content modules, but for us in Drupal, we'd probably be using paragraphs or blocks for this type of thing. And each of those components also has an autosave, has that autosave functionality. And the drafts and other statuses are managed in exactly the same way. So the labeling is really consistent, the interface is consistent, and content editors get used to this. So it becomes more intuitive. WordPress likewise has an autosave feature, and the different content revisions that are stored are quite numerous, because if you think about it, if your content is being saved automatically, you probably end up with a lot more revisions. In WordPress, these are called autosaves. And WordPress actually gives editors an interface, which on these slides here I've circled in red. It's a scroll interface to navigate through all the different revisions of your past content. So this is an interesting pattern. I don't think it's particularly labeled well here, to be honest, but I do think it raises the question of, we have so many revisions, what kind of tools are we giving content editors to really scroll through and reviewing all those revisions or autosaves that have been tracked. One thing that I know Drupal handles particularly well is languages. And certainly from a site builder's perspective, the multilingual features of Drupal are fantastic. It's one of the reasons my company decided to specialize in Drupal for all these years. But translation really does complicate things for content editors. And if you've ever managed a site with 2 languages, it's not very intuitive, the interface for going to a translation tab, adding translations. It does take some learning to get used to that. And this screenshot shows one proposed idea for managing bilingual websites in which we have 2 languages we're managing. And it's quite experimental, but it's a side-by-side translation feature. So if you don't see the screenshot, it just provides 2 columns, the left column for one language and the right column for another. It is quite an experimental feature because there's a lot of metadata around content that also sometimes needs to be translated. But I do suggest checking it out and testing it for your use case to see if it's going to work for you. After we think about workflows, we also have to plan for content compliance. So just, content editors, they want easier ways to ensure that their content is compliant. They're not always experts in accessibility and SEO, and yet it's up to them to ensure that accessibility, SEO, brand guidelines are followed when content gets published. And so one big win we get with Drupal is just the fact that content is highly structured, or that if we're the ones building the website, we can make content highly structured. So if we're breaking up our content into content types and using things like block types and paragraph types to define more granular content, more like our content components, this really helps us be more, facilitate more content compliance, because we can decide then on the front end how all those things are going to get displayed. And it really provides us a much better tool for content compliance than, say, just WYSIWYG editor everywhere. But that being said, there are some places where we still need to provide some kind of an editor tool for producing HTML. And one thing that Contentful does that's really interesting, that I was kind of surprised by this the first time I saw it, is that it has a built-in Markdown editor rather than a WYSIWYG editor. And this provides content editors more visibility into the markup they're producing. Of course, it might take a bit more training or getting used to. It's not as familiar to folks as a WYSIWYG editor interface, but it does kind of give those editors more control. And it is an editor, so they still have buttons available to be able to produce the Markdown quickly. Drupal integrates really well with tools like SiteImprove, which are designed to give users more insight into content compliance. And you might be familiar with SiteImprove. There is a free browser extension you can use. But if you want to have like kind of a full overview of the content compliance of your site, SiteImprove is a paid tool. One other tool that I would really recommend checking out is a module called Editorially. And I'll just click play on the little demo here. What this module does is it allows you to select what part of the page is actually the content of the page. And then it provides a tool on the front end for content editors as they're reviewing their content to see any errors that have popped up just in that content area. And I like how it allows you to focus on the content, because content editors can't do much about accessibility of other aspects of the website. Now, when it comes to flexibility, of course, there's lots of debate about the best tools to give content editors to make sure that their content is really flexible. I just wanted to give you a taste of what some other tools are doing. So this is a demo from Contentful, and it allows you to add different content modules to a page. And you see here that this is a hero image component that's being added. And within that, you can add things like media, because there's a media field here. And then within the media field, there's particular fields that you can use. Like we're uploading an image here. We can add some metadata around the image. And the interface that's used, if you notice, it's kind of like a flyout menu. If you're watching the video, you can see that there's different panels that fly in, and then there's arrows on the top left corner to kind of navigate back up to the parent content. And so it's really clear, this hierarchy of content, and I kind of like the interface that's provided that makes that really obvious to content editors. So just moving on to the next demo. In this demo, we see the Gutenberg editor that WordPress provides now out of the box. And it's also a page building tool. It allows us to select different types of components to use to build our content. And everything is meant to be really in place in this tool. So we see the content appear as we're writing it. We can click right below to add a new content, and everything for editing the styling of the content kind of appears as we hover over it. And so this gives users less visibility into the structure and more into like what their page is actually going to be like. So the focus here is more on the kind of preview and the styling. Then if we look at another tool, this is WordPress's Elementor tool. It has more, it's more similar to Drupal's layout builder in that it allows you to select your layout before you start to place components. It uses a similar kind of overlay feature to allow us to edit those components. And with Elementor, we're also able to design our own elements so that we can extend the types of content that we can place into this interface. And finally, many of you are already familiar, I'm sure, from using it or from other presentations. You're familiar with Drupal's layout builder tool, which also gives you the ability to choose a layout and add blocks to it. So to create the container for the content and then choose what content you're adding. Obviously, Layout Builder is really flexible because we have full control over all of the content blocks, all of the block types we're making available, the templates that are used to display these, and also the templates for all of the layouts that Layout Builder manages. So here, Layout Builder really wins on flexibility, both for content editors, but also for us as the ones kind of controlling the content editor interface. So that being said, with Layout Builder, there are modules I would recommend using with that, because out of the box, the interface for Layout Builder is not designed for content editors first. It's not like the first audience for this module. So here's my list of all the module suggestions that you can take away from this presentation. And the ones for Layout Builder in particular are Layout Builder restrictions, Layout Builder modal, and there's a whole suite of other modules around Layout Builder that you can try out as well. So these are all the, if you're going to screenshot something from this presentation, this slide might be a good one. These are all the different modules that I would recommend maybe checking out, kind of categorized by those different content editor needs that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation. So this is a very short presentation. 20 minutes doesn't leave a lot of time for Q&A. So feel free to email me if you have any comments or questions. And on Drupal Slack, I'm Pixelite, so you can always message me there as well. And I'm just looking to see the Q&A. Yeah, just this last question here. Does Contentful have revisions of content blocks? And so when we create a new version of a block and place it in draft status, is the old version available? Yes. So that's one of the things I think Contentful does really well, is this management of revisions for everything, including their content blocks, which they call content modules. So were there any other questions or comments people wanted to share? Okay, question about CK Editor 5, and does anything in this editor improve the content editor experience? That's a good question. I mean, I think in general for the for CK Editor, we need to think about which buttons we make available to content editors. Sometimes people have the tendency to over-provide in terms of features there. I think one thing that that editor experience, like that continues to be an issue with that editor experience, is things like embedding media through the WYSIWYG editor. That's still a need for content editors, and being able to have some control over positioning of images and videos is something that people still want. So I would focus on that, although I haven't really myself reviewed CK Editor 5 or the differences that introduces. Question here from Sam. Normally, clients don't see any relevance investing in the author experience because normally people editing the pages are not the ones who are actually the clients for the project. So how do you convince the client? I think one way, I mean, just in general, in terms of a user experience process, we try to introduce actual users into the discovery phase. So for example, inviting content editors to a user experience workshop, if that's something that you're running anyway, I think that helps because it shows the leadership or the actual decision maker, like here is somebody, here's what they're struggling with, here's their pain point, and this is how it's going to be easier if we spend a bit more time on the content editor experience. And then also doing a demo of, here's what we're going to provide, here's what you have now. It doesn't have to be complicated, but something really quick to just show the difference, that might help. What is the most important thing for Drupal to solve? Terminology, content overview, something else? Yeah, I think there's so many areas of, I mean, like I kind of showed how I would break this down. I think that we have to think about what Drupal needs to solve, as in like what to solve in Drupal core, versus what are things that are really nice to solve in Contrib. Like certainly translation interface might be a good thing to tackle in Contrib because there's just so many use cases. I think that things like enhancing the content overview page, that might be something to experiment with as Contrib modules. I'm sure there's actually already out there, people doing this, and then looking at what is a generic enough solution to add to Drupal core. And then I think the thing that's maybe hard to solve is terminology, because terminology becomes ingrained in our community. We call things nodes, we call things content types. It would be really hard to change that. But if we had more consistent terminology that was more content editor friendly, introducing that in core would be a huge benefit, because that's not something that's easy to just go and configure sometimes to improve. I'm thinking especially the the layout builder interface. Why are most of these things not solved after all these years, while other CMS competitors seem to have a better interface? Yeah, I would say it always comes down to the fact that Drupal is such a flexible tool that it doesn't try to impose a particular use case. So looking at an example like WordPress, which has historically been built for use cases that are more around, blog style content. That's kind of the core use case there. That makes it easier to create an interface that seems more user-friendly for content editors. So I think that it comes from that. And then Contentful. Contentful is really just an interface for managing content and doesn't take into account, the front end, because it's up to you to do that front end building. And so they again have kind of a more specific use case and a specific focus for the platform. So I think if we were looking for reasons why, it's just all about that. Drupal, I love the fact that Drupal's backend, the admin UI is so flexible, but it's also the UI that site builders use. And so it's kind of a multi-purpose interface. So who do we optimize for? It's always, I think, been more the site builder, because those are the people actually tending to build the sites. And then content editors, we've relegated that maybe more to a secondary user in the past. Oh, and then what do I think of the difference between layout builder and paragraphs? I have a whole other presentation on this. You can probably find it. We could talk about that quite extensively. I love layout builder, but I don't think that, I think that there's a lot of optimization to be done to use it for content editors. There's more clicks and more kind of learning to do to get to the point where it's a user-friendly interface for that audience. But I do think that content editors really love that flexibility. And so if we plan well, that's a great experience for them. And we should work towards making that a great experience. Paragraphs also provides a great tool for designing content components that you can use to assemble a page. But it's not in core, and it's not quite going to give you as much flexibility. So I think there's some caveats there. A link with the slides and the module list. Okay, I'm gonna work on that right now. I'll just put back up on the screen for 2 seconds if I can. Hopefully this is okay. That module list, and so you can do a screen capture in the meantime. Yeah, so do you see an increasing trend in the need to build a better layout builder in your Drupal client base? Yeah, I see an increased trend in big institutions moving to layout builder, which is really exciting. and I think it's going to mean that there's more people investing in that interface and making that work. I also see those institutions investing in documentation for their content editors and making sure that they have really clear brand guidelines, usage guidelines around how to use different block types through that interface. So it is an investment people are making in building really a platform for their content editors, which is, I think, a great approach. But I don't think every organization necessarily has the time to do that. So I'm interested to see other usage patterns and how it all develops. Do you agree that Drupal has multiple backend themes available, or would you rather see one choice? Oh, I really like, I mean, I think that there should be choice, as in like you should be able to design your own theme for the backend as you need to. But I love the fact that Claro is such an improved admin UI for the backend that we can all use, because it means that when we write documentation for Drupal, we have this great looking UI, and then it's consistent when content editors find that documentation. It doesn't have to be as customized to them if it's the same as what they're using. Because I think content editors are sensitive to things looking different in documentation than what they see in the backend. So as much as possible, I mean, if we're all using Claro, I think that's great. There's a lot of benefits. So I think other sessions are starting, and I don't want to keep everybody here, but thanks so much for attending, and thanks for all the great questions. I think this is a great conversation to have, and I'm glad to see also so many other sessions about content editor experience and how to improve these things. So thanks for all of you for attending, and hope to see you around the rest of the DrupalCon.